All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Carol, my lovely, beautiful co host, Sarah. Thanks for
Hi.
joining us again today. We are going to be doing part two of the Clairs, and today we're going to be talking about clairaudience. Ta da!
Ta-da. Super cool.
Yep. So I hope everybody enjoyed the clairvoyant. If you haven't seen that yet, go back and take a look at that. For those of you that are very visual, we also highlighted the six clairs. We're not going to get into those today. We're just kind of going to dive straight into clairaudience, unless you had anything you wanted to summarize from the first video.
Um, no, I didn't think about that. So
Felt complete. Okay,
it
no
might come up
worries.
later, but
Gotcha.
yeah.
Well, after sometimes we do the video, there's always like, oh man, I wished I'd have said this, or I wished I'd have said that. So
Yeah, yeah. I
any
know. I think there
hindsights
were
about it?
there were a few moments where I was like, oh, I wish but now I forgot what it was.
Yeah,
So
that's all right. No worries. All right. So we talked last time in clairvoyance, and it was obviously a big one for you. And I talked about how it was not a big one for me. And so as we get into clairaudience, and of course, for those who are watching that may not know, clairaudience is what we call clear hearing. But hearing is actually kind of confusing because I've heard people say, well, I don't hear anything. And
right.
and I remember trying to tell them, no, it's not like you're hearing it with your ears, although that is still clairaudience. It's like internal hearing, things that happen in your mind. And
It's like
honestly,
the
hearing,
little voice, the little
yeah, there
voice
you
inside
go.
your
That's a
head.
good way to put it. And it's
Yeah.
not even, it's like, it's almost like a thought. You had a thought, right? But you're
Yep.
hearing it verbally. So how would you describe it?
Yeah, it's kind of like that little voice inside your head that says whatever it says, but it I don't know, like it answers back. And sometimes I just think this is your inner guidance. It's like this little, whatever little voice, like maybe not everybody has it, but well, I mean, when you want to talk about like clairaudience in general, like, because it can also be in the form of music.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I think that this is sometimes how people get these like grand ideas about things. And I mean, it could happen in clairvoyance as well, where you see, um, like I think we talked about Tesla and how, well, we didn't talk about it in the video, but we've talked about it,
Right. Yes.
about
Personally. Yeah.
how, he was tapped in and he could like see like the inventions and stuff, but it was also like hearing. And so I think a lot of people can get this like divine inspiration even like with music downloads. Like you're big on the downloads, you just get this like massive download of information, you write
Right.
it out, and there you go. But it could also just be like a voice in your head that says, hey, don't go down that dark alley right now because it's a bad idea, you
But
know
do you hear that, or is that voice a gut instinct? Because that's really very different between kind of having that clear sentient, kind of that gut reaction that says, it just feels wrong. That really isn't a thought. That's more of a feeling. But I think if
unless you
we,
hear it
unless
unless
you
you hear
hear
it
it, right, unless
right.
there's actually something in your mind. So
Right.
you brought up some good points, so what does clairaudience look and feel like, right? Well, it doesn't necessarily feel a certain way, but first of all, you're right. It's those internal sounds, or dialogues, right? They're conversations that we have in our mind. They may just be random singular words. I remember one day I was out gardening, and all of a sudden in the middle of nowhere, I heard the word preeclampsia. And I'm like, what?
Whoa.
Why would I hear that? That's really strange. And
Yeah.
so it's irrelevant to me in my life. I couldn't figure out what it meant, and I just heard it. So of course I ran and I immediately Googled it, because it kind of like having a visual or something. It's like, what does that mean, or why am I hearing that word? I couldn't place it, and I couldn't figure out why I had heard it, but it was very obvious that it's like, wow, that's really strange. That word just, it was a singular word. But then again, you're right. You can have these entire conversations or dialogues.
Right.
My downloads, which people tend to think of channeling, comes in terms of conversations, of these long dialogues.
Yeah.
Um, in many ways, we talked about clairvoyance, where you're doing the daydreaming and you just let the visuals take place. When it comes to clairaudience, you're letting the words just evolve.
Right.
That's what you're trying to do, is let the words just flow. Some of them may be your own creative mind, but at some point there might be some, like you said, inspiration that kicks in. And then your good point, thoughts, concepts, right? And then I know music lyrics, like you said, are good for me. Lines from movies, movie lines or something like that. It's like, or song titles even. It's like I was thinking about a friend, and all of a sudden I started wanting to sing the song Heartbreak Hotel, and then it transformed into California Hotel. So I heard the two different songs. So when I started talking to her about it, she goes, "Oh, that's so funny. My boyfriend is in California and he and I just broke up." So she was really very upset about it. So those two audio clues were very significant to her in her life. And for me, I'm thinking, that's so weird. Why do I want to sing that song? And then why did I transfer from Heartbreak Hotel immediately to Hotel California? So those two things blended together, but had extreme significance for her. So that's kind of the way that clairaudience comes about. So do you consider yourself clairaudient? I know clairvoyance was very visual.
Yeah, I definitely, I mean, it started off slow. But I wake up with like lyrics or music in my head all the time. Like, and usually that has some sort of meaning to it.
Relevance to your life.
And usually it's like a message for me, like, or I mean, it could be for someone else, but usually it's for me. So
it's personal guidance.
And sometimes it's like a song that I don't even know, like, or like I've heard it before, but I have to like find it if I want to like listen to the whole song, and I'll only get like a piece of it maybe, but it'll just be like in my head, Do
you feel like the whole song is significant, or just the little bit of lyric that you hear? For me, it's just a little bit of lyric.
Sometimes I think it's just a little bit of lyric where, maybe that's the main message of what they're trying to convey.
Right.
But you could look to the whole song for additional meaning and see if it has relevance, or like look up all the lyrics, kind of thing.
I agree. Although I've generally found that just whatever I get tends to be the significance. That's why I was asking if that was the same for you.
Yeah. Usually it's just a little bit, but also what I wanted to say about the little voice in your head is that sometimes it can sound like your own little voice, but sometimes it does have, like if you notice, like that doesn't, like you said, the word that came to mind that was completely out of the norm, or sometimes you'll pick up a male or female context.
I've heard great point.
Accents before, and I'm like, why, what? Like, also, ringing in the ears. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with clairaudience, but a lot of times like whooshing in the ears is like a sign for me that something is needing my attention.
I've had other people say that before, and I've heard that. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but then it's not true for me. That doesn't mean it's not true for other people. So,
right. I don't know. And then also, like, if you find yourself getting all this information, and then you're like recalling what that information was, and you're like, wow, like, what you were talking about earlier, but just, like the ideas or concepts, and then you're recalling, like, yeah, how did I come up with that? Like that wasn't from me. That was definitely some sort of outside source. So those are things to take note of. I think the only way to really get around or wrap around clairaudience is to be able to master your thoughts. Like you have to be able to be conscious of what is
said. Yes.
coming in and going out, and whether or not that's you or that's something that you would normally think or whatever. But in order to really catch it, you have to be aware of the thoughts that are going through your head.
Very true. Very true. And that's a good point too, because you're right. Oftentimes it's like, it just feels like my own voice, but it doesn't mean that, is it my own thought? It's like, why would I say preeclampsia to myself? It's like, that's really strange. Or why would I suddenly start singing Hotel California? that seems very odd. Now maybe I heard it on an elevator that morning in the doctor's office. It didn't register consciously. And then I started singing because, you go, why am I singing that? And then you go, oh, that's that song that's in that commercial. And I saw it yesterday. So we do have to be careful that sometimes we can have those little things playing in our mind, and they can come from physical sources, which is why I think you're right. You have to be aware, but there are also those times when they come in and you're like, no, I didn't see it on a commercial. I wasn't in an elevator today. I wasn't hearing it on the radio. I have not heard that song that I'm aware of in a really long time. So you stop and you go, why did I hear that word? Or why did I hear that, whatever that was that came through? And you're right. It often sounds like our own voice, especially if it's psychic, I think, because the psychic information is our own perception. So it tends to come in our own voice. Mm-hmm. You raised a good point, though, is if it's coming from spirit, it still feels like my own voice for me personally. If it's male or female, I feel that. So that's a clairsentient aspect.
Okay, right.
I generally don't hear it as a male voice or a female voice. It still sounds like my own voice. And it still feels like my own thoughts. But instead of coming from me, it kind of feels like they're coming into me. It kind of feels like I get hit with it as opposed to me generating it. And unless somebody's had that experience, they probably aren't going to understand what I'm saying. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
I guess I want to mention it for people that are going, yeah, but it kind of floats into me. And it's not like I'm creating it. There are some differences.
Yeah, I think it depends too. Like certain guides, I think, have certain ways of conveying information that you can kind of get used to and be like, oh, I now have a familiarity with this particular guide. And so when they come through, I know because of the way that they sound or the way that they feel or what they're saying is this particular person. And then you might start to add things, I think. And maybe you do that yourself where you're like, oh, well, it's a guy, so you give it a male voice, right?
That's always possible. Right.
But I have had instances where, I've heard what sounds like a low voice or what sounds like a really high pitched kind of feminine voice. So I think it just depends on what you're doing. Like if you're on an investigation or something like that, you might want to be a little bit more open to keeping your thoughts and spaces clear in your brain anyways, so that if something does come in, you would be able to recognize it.
Very true. Yeah, very true.
Oh yeah, because that's what I wrote down here was to practice the pause. So if you, like, for example, ask a question and maybe you want to have a conversation with your guides, you throw out the question and then you practice the pause. So try to empty your mind, empty your brain, and let the information come through. And see, if you get something clairaudient, then you need to be listening, right?
Or, even if you feel the urge to sing a song or you're drawn to some type of a book, maybe a passage in a book, right? But you're right. I think a lot of it is we call it clairaudient. We think of it as hearing, but honestly, it's basically a thought. Now, I want to go back to something that you highlighted because it's really important. You talked about the whooshing or the ringing, because remember when we were talking about clairvoyance, we talked about clairvoyance that happens in the mind, but then we talked about this clairvoyance that we physically see with our eyes, right? Remember we talked about seeing auras and colors. So we do need to talk about the fact that clairaudience does occur when we actually hear it with the ears. Okay.
Right.
So from an example for that, which you already talked about is maybe where you're hearing ringing, but you may also hear raps or bangs. Some people say they feel like they heard someone say their voice. They're not hearing it in their mind. They're hearing it with their ears. It sounds like it's in the environment.
Right.
I had a family
like a disembodied type voice.
Right. Exactly. Or just just random sounds. Even, I had a family that said that they kept hearing the music from an ice cream truck, and multiple people in the family would hear it, but it was only select members of the family. Now, I don't want to get too far into what that is, but that's still a form of clairaudience. They were hearing it with their ears. I think that the majority of people that are clairaudient, it is in the form of a thought. It is happening inside the mind. But I don't want to negate the fact that we do have external hearing experiences. They're still considered psychic. Generally, you are the only one that's hearing them. So again, like visuals, like people seeing auras, you're the only one that saw it. No one else is seeing it. So it is it is a form of psychic experience to you.
What happens if the other person heard it too? Then it's just a disembodied voice that everybody heard.
And that's where it becomes, because we know, for example, haunting information for haunting places, right, where there's music that plays. It's it's an old bar or own saloon, and a wide variety of people will hear it, but some people don't hear it. It's still considered, as far as parapsychology is concerned, it's still considered psi-based. So in other words, they're still hearing it through the psychic senses because it's not actually playing in the environment. But for some reason, it's strong enough that more people hear it. It could be related to geomagnetics. So it's coming from the environment, and some people are sensitive to it. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it can be very complicated.
Well, to me, what you're saying is essentially it's residual, and that some people can pick up on it and some people won't.
Right. Yes. Very true. Yeah, very true. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
But the other thing too is let's take a look at psychokinesis, which we've talked about in the past, which is mind over matter. So in other words, people can affect the physical environment, right? So for example, we know people that do physical mediumship, they can actually, their own energy, right, can somehow affect the environment to where people will hear, knocking on, everyone in the room hears that.
Right.
So in that particular way, it's not really clairaudience anymore. If everyone is hearing it, it's basically the brain creating that experience. It's affecting the furniture. So the furniture makes the sound, and then everyone hears it. So that's a very different scenario. So I don't want to get too complicated, but it really just depends on what type of activity is happening if you're hearing it in the physical environment. That's why it's really important on investigations. Did anyone else hear it? Are you the only one that's hearing it? If multiple people are hearing it, then we want to start looking for, it's not just a personal psychic experience. It has foundations outside of the individual. But if you're the only one hearing the ringing, the whooshing, the disembodied voices, then it's clairaudience to you specifically. Am I explaining that well enough? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if it's an outside source, there could be an outside source, but definitely this kind of communication is within, like the clairaudience is within.
Right.
But yeah, I get what you're saying.
People get confused, right? I mean, it's like, if they're seeing or hearing a spirit with their eyes or actually hearing it with their ears, they may naturally assume, oh, I'm being haunted. That may not be the case. It may be just an experience just for you because your clairs are working in that way. So I just want to highlight that for people to kind of go, it may not be, that you're haunted. That's just how your clairs, that's how your sensory modality works for picking up stuff. So again, internal thoughts, we can still physically hear things with our ears that appear to be the environment, and they may be, but they may not be. It depends on the circumstances. So that's why we have investigations.
Investigations are good.
So that, I think we've done a good job of kind of talking about what it looks like, feels like, and some of the aspects of clairvoyance, or clairaudience. But when we were talking about clairvoyance, we talked about benefits, and we had said we thought that being able to see things would give us really good physical descriptors, right? So that was kind of one of those positives for clairvoyance. So what are one of the benefits of clairaudience in your opinion?
Well, just really kind of having a conversation you know.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It should be like a relay. It should feel like a relay. It should feel like, you know, you're actually having a conversation. But I mean, you can get names, you can get numbers, you can get birthdays, just like pertinent information that maybe you couldn't have picked up visually.
Exactly. I mean, if you're going to hear a name, not to say you couldn't see a name, right? I mean, you could see it. You might see a sign, you might see it like you're reading it, but ultimately you probably will hear it more than you will, or it'll be a thought more than anything else.
Yeah. So, I mean, in that way, like,
no, I think you're hitting it. I mean, as far as I was concerned, you're right. I think it's about the conversation. It's about the dialogue. It's very informational because channeling is so much about clairaudience, right?
Right.
Not to say that it couldn't come in the form of other clairs, but it's.
Well, I guess, yeah, no, I think, and also I kind of wonder, you know, like about musicians and stuff. Like, I think those kind of people, they get inspired and then they get this information and they hear the song, they make the song, and it's like.
Great example. I love that. That's a great example. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that can be, I don't even know any disadvantages really, other than the doubt, maybe the doubt that comes into your brain, you know,
and
about
that was,
it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was one of the things that I put down for a drawback is it's very difficult to discern if it's psychic or if it's just your own mental chatter. Right. Especially if it comes in your own voice, you may be thinking that it's you creating it. I mean, that happens with visuals. You think it's your own visual. That happens with clairsentience. You don't know if it's your feeling or someone else's. The same thing for clairaudience. You may feel inspired, I think is a great word. You know, it's like we feel like, oh, we've got an inspiration. We've got this thought, we've got this idea, but is it ours or did it come from somewhere else? And how do we discern that? It may be difficult to discern, and that's the whole point.
Well, some of the things that have come in, you know, they can be very profound. So you have this like profound, you know, poetic saying that comes in and even it blows your own mind.
Absolutely.
You know, that's kind of weird.
Right.
You know, and I think that's why these kinds of things should be paid attention to. And again, the only way to really figure it out is to get control of the thoughts in your brain and really sift them out, or otherwise it's
be the observer of them. Right. It's like, right. Instead of just letting them run 5,000 miles an hour. And we talked about that with clairvoyance as well. It's about slowing down and allowing ourselves to be a part of that visual or that audio information and go, that's really interesting.
Right.
But you're right. We're generally thinking or moving so quickly that we just run things over. And I do think that you raised a good point, and that's really important too. I prefer that if I'm getting inspired information, I like it when I get words that I don't know. I like it when I get it, like you said, whether it comes, maybe it rhymes, or maybe it uses words that are very archaic. I know you've read some of my channeled work, you know, where it comes in.
Right.
They might use the word thee or thou or very strange vocabulary. That's a good sign for you to go, wow, why would I say that? Why would I create that?
Right.
And so it kind of catches us off guard a little bit. And that, I think that's the other point, is to say, oh, that conversation was really weird. Stop and look at it instead of running over it. And
right. That's kind of what I was talking about with the recalling of the information. So it's like, if you all of a sudden find yourself in this like mental conversation, stop and recall what you've just said or thought or had come in. Absolutely. And really try to figure that out. Is that, you know, from an outside source, or was that from you, or, you know, and it's about discerning, you know, well, where have your thoughts been? Because a lot of this stuff will come random. So, you know, true. Mm-hmm. It needs to be kind of random. It can't just be like a natural train of thought, I guess. But these random thoughts that do come in can also come in the form of a question. So, you know, and this is kind of where my guides will be like, here's a question for you to ponder, and then practice the pause, ask the question, wait for the answers. And when they come, really analyze that information. Did you just blow your own mind by answering your question in a way that how could you have known that information?
Good point. Yeah, right.
You know, so I think those are important things to think about when you're trying to figure out if it's real, because the doubt can be really horrible when it comes to any kind of psychic information, but clairaudience, I think in particular, because it just feels like your own thoughts going blah, blah,
right.
blah, blah, blah.
And that's why I put that as a drawback, because it can seem like your own mental chatter. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. The only other drawbacks, and I think we've kind of already mentioned that I had down is that, again, if we're hearing it with our ears, we may dismiss it, right? Because we may dismiss whooshing or ringing as tinnitus, but we need to look for those correlations, right? Or if we're hearing voices, we may just go, did I really hear that? Or we dismiss those things. So I think sometimes when we hear them with our ears, we can dismiss that as environmental contamination. On the flip side of that, which I already mentioned, which I think can be a drawback, is if you are hearing things, you may naturally attribute that to maybe a haunting or a spirit, and it may just be the way that your clairaudience works. You may just be physically hearing it with your ears. And so that can create some confusion and some fear sometimes. So those can be some drawbacks there. But, and then too, is just not knowing whether or not it's our own creativity, whether we're receiving it or creating it. That's a hard part. It's the same thing with clairvoyance, though. Do we know if we're receiving it or creating it? But you've really highlighted some good ways to discern whether or not they're different. Yeah.
It's difficult. That's why
it can be difficult.
Yeah, it's practice. So that's also part of it. One other thing that I wrote down was just to write that shit down, because
write it down. What do you mean? Like as in keeping track of what you hear?
Yeah, if it helps. Like when, you know, for example, in your situation, I know you get a lot of downloads of like massive amounts of information at one time. I don't tend to do that as much. But I have written things down that I've gotten in the past. And I think it helps to, when you write it down, to understand that it wasn't really from you, or that it has like a different cadence about it. In the way that you hear it, you know what I mean? So it's not, and then look for like additional meanings. Like, why would this come? You know, what can you learn from this? You know, what was the purpose of this information? That's important.
Absolutely.
I don't think that your guides are just going to be like throwing random information at you for no reason. So there should be a purpose behind it, and it should have some kind of message, you know.
Well, and it depends on where the information's coming from too. And that's something we haven't talked about, but information can come from so many different places. It could be coming from you. It could be coming from the collective conscious. It could be coming from departed, you know, beings or spiritual beings, if whatever word we want to use there. So, I mean, we know that it can come from a variety of different places. I mean, I remember when there was chaos going on in the world around the election time, and a lot of us were receiving a lot of some of the same information, you know, getting some of the same clairaudience stuff. And we were all kind of going, where's this coming from? You know, is it relevant?
Right. I think that's the collective for sure.
Right. And so that complicates matter. So yes, you're right. I think it's okay to document it and to take note of it. But everything we hear or everything we see doesn't necessarily mean it's coming from a spiritual source. And that's a whole nother discussion. Not to say that it isn't relevant, because I think if it's coming through, it has relevance. The question is where's it coming from and what is that relevance? And that's the part where we have to look at that and discern that.
Right.
And just don't necessarily assume because it says, go buy a bunch of food and stock up on toilet paper, which I didn't do. That's an example. But, you know, I mean, we could have been picking that up from the collective, though, and we might have felt that same need to go do that, right? Or we might have heard that, but we were getting that from collective. Didn't necessarily mean we needed to buy into that. So that's where personal discernment needs to come in. Does that make sense why I'm saying that, though?
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that that's how it can be difficult. You know, psychic information can sometimes come in and you can't always place it, right?
Right. Well, again, that goes back to sometimes like it's not really our job to interpret it. Well, that's different for the sitter. When it comes to you, though, it should have a message. That's what I'm saying. So it's like it shouldn't just be kind of totally random. I mean, that's just weird. Why would that happen for nothing? It should happen for something. There needs to be something behind it, I think.
But
Like
it's
a
no different.
message
It's no different
or,
than you
you know,
walking in. It's no different than you walking into a Walmart and saying, boy, I'm picking up on the emotions of all the people that are in the store today because you're very empathic. That doesn't have any significance. That's just a
it
random
does.
event.
Actually, no, I will argue with you. It does have significance because you need to understand that that's happening, right?
Well, it's
Like,
happening to those people.
and that's the
Absolutely.
same, it's the same thing when you're getting bombarded with information from the collective. So, you know, it's
Absolutely.
like
Okay.
if
Yes.
you're getting all these like weird hits about why I need to go stock up on toilet paper and groceries, you should think about that. Why is that happening? Is that coming from me? Is that coming from my guys? Is that coming from the collective? It's a
But that's what I'm saying. You
learning
need to evaluate. It doesn't mean you need to
experience.
buy into it, though.
Well, okay, and some will argue with that too, but I'm just saying that
I mean, if you don't want to run
it
out of
has a
toilet paper
purpose,
because everybody's hoarding it, sure, go get the toilet
right? It's like
paper.
if you want toilet paper, Carol, you better go now because it's gonna be all gone. So it could have a purpose, you know. They didn't tell you to buy 12 packs of it. They just told you to go get some, right? Um, I don't know. But anyways, the point being is that there should be some kind of message behind it. Even if it's, oh, I went into the Walmart and I got bombarded by all these people's emotions. Well, why are you getting bombarded by all these people's emotions? You need to recognize that that's happening so you can stop it, right? You don't want to be bombarded by a bunch of people's
Well,
crap.
that's a good point. I mean, I think it can have the meaning that you want it to. So I'm not negating that. You're right. That's very true. I can't argue that. But I'm saying is don't feel like it's an attack. You know, don't. I guess be objective about what you're getting. Take a look at it and saying, where is this information coming from? It might just be by virtue of just you're an open and sensitive person. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing.
Right.
We're talking about evaluating and discerning, I think is what this is about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just want to mention, we did this with clairvoyance, is some potential clues to whether or not you're clairaudient dominant, right? Because again, we talked about in clairvoyance, everybody usually uses all their sensory modalities. We all generally hear, see, feel. Those seem to be the biggest ones. Obviously, some will be more predominant than others. You know, for example, clairaudience is a big one for me because again, I do the channeling and I get a lot of conceptual information. And so that's a big thing for me. So potential clues that you're clairaudient dominant is you have a big internal dialogue. Not everyone has an internal dialogue. Some people may be very in tune with their feelings and they're just going with the flow and they're not doing a lot of internal dialogue. I have a very, very high internal dialogue. Okay. Do you have a big internal dialogue?
I think it's selective. It's like my brain is always going, but I don't know that it's all words. I don't know. There's a lot. It's complicated.
Gotcha. And see, for me, my brain is primarily word oriented. So that is a big one
Yeah.
for me.
Inside my brain is like ADD.
Well, I think everybody's brain is. Another one is you love writing, journaling, doing poetry. You're a big reader. Obviously, I'm a big reader. Words are very important to me, less so than visuals. We talked about in the clairvoyance. You know, the visuals are very important to you. It's not to me. I'm not a painter. I'm not a drawer. I mean, I love movies and I enjoy visual stimulation, but overall, writing, journaling, poetry, reading, those types of things, even if it's music, to me, that's still an audient type of thing, right? Some people see music, but overall, that is a hearing. So those are things that you
Right.
could be clairaudient dominant. Also, too, you speak to others. Language is really important to you. Conveying thoughts and ideas, right? So again,
Right.
you're dealing with thoughts and concepts. That may be another key as well. You may be highly stimulated by knowledge, information, details, and what you read or hear. Those could be other clues to clairaudience dominance. Okay. And then another one is, we talked about this a lot with clairvoyance, as I said, if you think back to a past memory, do you see it or do you hear it? And I remember telling you, I remember what people say because
Right.
I'm word oriented. I'm thought oriented. I hear the conversation. So if I go back to a past event, I can see it, but overall, it's what was said that's the most important thing for me. Oh, I
Right.
heard this. You said this. You said that. No, you said this. No, you said that. Other people go, I don't know what she said.
Right.
If you're like that, you're probably not clairaudient as much, if you're more into the visuals. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
kind of pay attention, clue yourself in. Oh no, I do remember conversations a lot. So those are some
Mhm.
keys that clairaudience is probably a big one for you.
Yeah.
And then the last thing, which we've talked about, working with clairaudience, and I think you already touched on this a little bit because it's like, okay, so we feel like we're clairaudient. How do we work with that? What do we do with it? And you brought up the excellent point of slowing down and paying attention to what you're thinking. And that's hard, especially if we're turbulent, right? Or we're upset or we're agitated, probably going to have zero psychic senses when we're agitated because our
Right.
thoughts are running over themselves. If we're doing a sitting or if you're connecting with in an investigation, what's the first thing we do? We slow down and we listen.
Right.
We're paying attention to what we're actually thinking. We have to slow down. I think you really hit the nail on the head with that as being a key to it. And so going back to our video where meditating, loving or hating it, if you're clairaudient and you're meditating and you're stopping all language and all thought, you're stopping clairaudience. That's my opinion. Oh, see, I disagree with that. Why? Which is why we have our perspectives. You think it's just
Yeah.
going to
No.
come in anyway, huh?
Mhm.
See,
Yeah.
no, not for me.
Okay.
Because
So,
I need the dialogue. This inspiration and the insight comes in the dialogue.
the
But
whole
it is
point,
both. It is both. I will
it's
admit it's
both.
both.
The whole point when you meditate is that you're creating space for anything to come in, whether it's visual or audible or feelings. Okay. So that's why we meditate, is so that we practice the muscle of creating space in your brain for stuff to come in that's higher than yourself, right? So it can come in voices. So like when I'm meditating and I meet with my guides, I don't just see the guide and then not hear anything, right?
Right.
Hear it. Or when I go to the beach and I'm in my meditative place, I'm hearing
But when you
the
see your guide,
waves, I'm hearing.
okay. So when you see your guide and he says something, you already said you're going to ask a question. Don't you expect to hear an answer? So you're
Yeah.
engaged in the dialogue. That's what I'm saying. It's like you don't just sit there and not think. You're part of the conversation, just like you're part of the visual. You have to be part of the conversation.
But it doesn't stop your clairaudience. Being in meditation and focusing on a visual, the whole reason why you focus on the visual is to get rid of the thoughts. Get rid of the thoughts about, oh, I have to do the dishes, or oh, I have to do this or that. It's to really get a grip on what's going on inside of your head. So if I am, visualizing the beach, I can no longer be worried about that kind of stuff, right?
I
And
get that. No, I
like I
get
said,
that.
it's about practicing the muscles. So you're creating endurance to keep the time frame that you can be receiving this information. So that way, when you're sitting with someone and you're doing a reading, you can do it for an hour and you're not exhausting yourself. Does that make sense? And it
Yeah,
incorporates all of these
absolutely.
psychic senses. We're not
But you're not
limiting.
doing nothing though. That's the point. And I think people think that meditation is doing nothing. And I don't want to get off on meditation, but we're not doing nothing. We are engaged in a visual exchange, or we're engaged in a conversation exchange, right?
It will become that. The whole point to getting to that point is that you have to eliminate everything else. So you're not going to have that
Absolutely. No, no, no.
conversation with your
Absolutely.
guide.
Yes, that's very true. That's very
right?
true.
If you don't eliminate all the chatter and you don't do that, then you're not going to end up having the conversation with the guide because you couldn't get there to begin with. Does that make sense?
It does. And so we're talking about working with clairaudience. And here's the other suggestion that I will make for people that feel like they have a lot of clairaudience or they want to improve their clairaudience, because this is how it started for me. I journal. Okay. I write. I love journaling. And so I would sit down, and of course now I get channeling and I get lots of information. That's how it started for me. So engage in a conversation. We were talking about visualizations for working with clairvoyance. This is about engaging in conversation for clairaudience. So sit down and journal and just start writing. I don't care if you're rambling your thoughts. I don't care if you ask your guide something and then just let the answers come to you. That is a part of what working with clairaudience is. So when I'm saying meditation, yes, you have to make space for that. If I'm journaling, I'm paying attention to the journaling, paying attention to the thoughts. I'm not thinking about the grocery list or what the kids are doing or what the dog's over here throwing up, right? I'm only engaged in the conversation. Clairvoyance would be only in the visual. So if you're going into a meditative state, that's why I'm saying, yes, you're right. Make space to pay attention and only be doing that. But you're not devoid of doing something. There's still something actively taking place. And it's either creating a visual or having that visual, or it's having the conversation.
True. So like I said, if you ask the question, for example, and you're journaling, you can write down the question and then just wait for the answer. Just wait for it to come and then write it all out. And then you'll see what it says.
Or the other thing that I would suggest to people is you've asked the question and then go ahead and start thinking about it as far as yourself is concerned. So this person at work gave me a really hard time and I would like to have insights. Okay. And you want to wait, and you might sit there and say, well, nothing's coming. I'm waiting. But you have to feel inspired to write something. So go ahead and feel inspired to write something. Start with your own feelings. I was really angry when this person, blah, 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 blah. That's your own thoughts. That's your own processing. But then allow those thoughts, allow those conversations to keep going. Just keep letting the thoughts, the feelings, the words coming in and then putting them onto paper. And at some point, you will find that they shift from yours to that insightful. You'll go, oh, wow. You'll have that aha moment. Maybe you write 3 paragraphs and there's only one sentence in there that goes, where did that sentence come from? Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah. I think it should be more than one sentence, but definitely the bulk of it should be there.
It depends. We talk about it. We talk about a clairvoyant. A visual can be very quick. You could be writing all of the things that make you angry. You could write 2 pages of anger, and there could be one little paragraph in there that was an inspired moment that gave you an insight that you go, I've never thought of that before. Where did that come from? Now, and that's why it feels like it may not feel psychic, right? It could have been a psychic insight. It could have come from the collective. It could have come from your soul. It could have come from your higher self. It could have come from a guide. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter in the beginning. It just matters that you go, wow, where did that come from? Where did that one paragraph come from out of those 3 pages? That's why I'm saying it for people to do clairaudience. Do the writing, do the journaling, ask the question, and then I know you're saying sit there and wait. And I want the listener to, whoever's listening, you guys decide how you want to do it. But I'm saying just write, because then you're letting the conversation take place. You're allowing the conversation to happen. And then the psychic part of the conversation will kind of drop in what it needs to go, and then you keep going.
I think we're saying the same thing. I think we are. I just think that maybe we have different ways of doing it. Perhaps. I just like to, sometimes I used to write a lot more, in my teenage years.
Some people don't want to sit down and take time to write. Yeah.
Right. But I used to write, I would just be like, why am I so angry right now? And then I would just get this whole slew of answer and, ways for me to look into myself as to why I was so angry.
So
and
did
then
you feel that those were psychic, or did you feel that they were self-generated? I mean, does it
I
matter?
feel like it was meant, I don't know, it was meant to come out the way that it did for self-reflection. That's the point. So when you reread it to yourself and you're like, wow, I do that. Wow, you know, I don't know, there should be some kind of aha with it.
Absolutely.
Even if it feels like you wrote it out, but definitely the pause and to receive. So it's like, ask the question and then wait till you feel inspired to write out the answer. Just like you're saying.
I would call it actively receptive. You know, it's like we're still engaged, because you see some people meditate and the next thing you know, they're doing this. And they were just in a completely altered state where nothing really happened. That's very relaxing for the body and the physical side and everything else. But you've really disengaged the senses at that point. And that's the point of psychic information. You can't go into an altered state so far that you've disengaged your psychic senses. They still need to be participating in the process. So it's receptive, but active at the same time, which for people that get it, they'll get it. And other people, it might take a period of time before you go, oh, that's what it should feel like. You know, they tell you to meditate on a candle flame for 20 minutes. And the next thing you know, the only thing you did was stare at a candle flame for 20 minutes and nothing happened. That's because you disengaged everything else.
Staring at a candle flame for 20
Oh yeah.
minutes?
You haven't heard that one? That's just that's just a very traditional. It keeps you focused on that. It's very relaxing for the body because it stops the.
Looking at the fire, I could see that. Like I like to gaze into the fire.
Yep. It's just a focal point. It pushes. It's like saying focus on your breath. It becomes a focal point. But when you're doing when you want psychic information, you can't be so in tune with just that you've shut everything else out. Otherwise,
but it's about the sixth sense. So you are kind of wanting to separate a little bit, because I don't know. I get what you're saying, but I also feel like because the senses that we're talking about, the clairs, they're not a physical thing. It's a psychic thing. So what does it matter if you're in your body or not? Like if you're in an altered state,
awareness,
if you're in an altered state, just like astral, because like you're in an altered state, you're seeing or feeling all of those senses in that altered state. So it's not necessarily in my body, it would be in the altered state. I don't know, maybe.
I understand what you're saying, and I'm just going to say, for me personally, I think there's a fine line, because if my body is getting a lot of sensations and feelings, I need to be capable of observing it. I need to be engaged in the process of being aware of what is taking place.
Right? Yes.
Aware.
Yes.
If I am so focused on a candle flame that I'm not aware of other things that are taking place visually, auditorily, or within my body, I'm only focused on the candle flame, I've shut all that out. I just stop the psychic information from coming in, because my awareness is so focused on only that.
Right.
For
Whereas
me,
it should be like this expansion.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, if I'm reading a sitter or a spirit, or I'm doing something, I'm actively perceiving information. I have to be aware of what's coming in visually.
Right.
So I can't be so detached that I'm not aware of what's coming in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it is an altered state. You do have to slow down.
It's just, to me though, like meditation is still kind of an altered state, and you're still getting all your senses there. But I think what you're meaning is like aware. I get that. You do have to be at least alive, conscious of what you're getting. So yeah.
But that's the point. I think that when we were talking about meditation, is people take it so far that they think that nothing is supposed to happen. If that's the type of meditation that you want, if you're going to go all the way here over to meditation to where nothing is happening, you're going to have all kinds of physiological benefits from that, but you may miss some of the psychic stuff that's coming, because psychic is a process that allows, but is still aware.
Right.
It is still engaged.
Allowing, that's the best word yet that
Yeah,
you've used.
because
Yeah.
I have to be aware of what is coming in verbally, visually, and through my body. Plus, I'm actively scanning. What am I feeling? What am I sensing? What am I hearing? I'm asking those questions. I'm engaged.
Right. I understand.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know if that was a tangent for clairaudience, but it was a tangent for being aware, I think, overall. So no.
No,
But
it's
anyway,
good.
so with working with your clairaudience, we again slowing down but still monitoring. I again talked about the journaling, getting out and just letting the words take place. That's why writing can be so cathartic for people, is because we can have all of these insights. The psychic
Yes.
information can flow through. Creativity is very closely drawn to psychic information. I mean, we know that from studies. They kind of seem to overlap. So if you can get yourself in a creative state, you know, if you're visual and you want to do it through painting, how many people get their emotions and their inspiration and they paint things and they go, I don't know where this came from, but they bring something forward in their artistry. Same thing with words and with writing or with poetry or even music. Okay, because all of those are working our hearing. Make sense?
Right. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And then, like any other psychic information, it tends to be it'll be like you said, powerful or insightful, or it may be something that's really bizarre, like why hear preeclampsia when I'm thinking about flowers. So it's a very counter experience to what your current train of thought is, or why do I want to
Right.
sing that song now, or why am I thinking about that movie all of a sudden? I haven't seen that in 20 years, and then it suddenly becomes relevant. So we're looking for those little weird, that's interesting. It's kind of a blip. Yeah.
Right. Right. I think a lot of psychic information comes in that way anyway. So they're little blips.
They do. They're blips. Yeah. They're anomalous blips. Again, we can be on a train of ranting and anger, and then all of a sudden there's this blip that comes in that's loving and polite and kind, and we go, oh, that's off my train of thought. I wonder why I
Right.
heard that. And then we go back to that, because that may be the insight that we need if our train of thought is here. So
Right. Right. Yeah, a good example of that is when I was living next to a neighbor that I wanted to destroy. And I was asking for guidance about how do I get past this? And I literally heard turn the other cheek, and the neighbor pops. I was like, hi neighbor. And I was like, just like, okay, here we go. Not allowed to do anything. Was definitely not my train of thought. Definitely.
yeah. Yeah, and that's something good
That's the point.
good example
That story.
to pay attention to. Yeah. Or vice versa. You could be a very positive and loving person, then all of a sudden you hear a negative thought, right? And that doesn't mean that that's a bad thing, but maybe there's some trauma or there's some emotion there that you need to be paying attention to. Maybe
Right.
you're just feeling things in life are really going well, and then all of a sudden you're brought back to this painful experience that you had 20 years ago. Don't just go, gee, why did I think of that? Go, gee, why was
did I
that
think of
brought to
that?
the surface? There
Right.
must be something there that you don't need to relive it, but maybe there's something there that's holding you back. Maybe you are trying to get to your next step in life and you've asked for help and guidance, and you get shown this traumatic event. Don't
Right.
ignore that. That may be the insight that you're being given that says this traumatic event is what's holding you from moving forward. You haven't
Right.
correlated the two yet,
Right.
but that matters. So pay attention to those little odd blips that are different from your train of thought.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we highlighted with clairvoyance, which I will also highlight with clairaudience, is when you get the clairaudience, like you said, stick with it, because generally the psychic information may also have a visual, or it may also have a feeling. So keep that word, keep that passage, keep that concept in mind, and see what other psychic information comes with it. Because your clairs generally don't work in a single sense. They generally work in a collective. So even if your primary is a clairaudient sound, stop and go, oh, why am I hearing Heartbreak Hotel? What does that feel like to me? If I feel an instant state of sadness, that's going to tell me. So it has emotion with it. It may also have visuals with it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Should be coupled with stuff.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, as all the clairs do. So I think that kind of sums it. We got off on a little bit of tangent there, but I don't know if anybody has any questions about clairaudience or they're having some strange experiences. Feel free to make some comments down below, and we can always respond to those. And then on part 3, we will be doing the big one, which is clairsentience, which is
the big one,
which is clair feeling. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about that, because there's so many different aspects to clairsentience. And if you consider yourself empathic, then clairsentience will be a big one for you. If you consider yourself a medical or a medical intuitive or a medical psychic, clairsentience falls into that as well. So it's a big topic.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, our contact information is down below. Please like, please subscribe, and we will see you on part 3 with clairvoyance or clairsentience. Oh no. All right, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.